Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where looking someone in the eye could be the most dangerous thing you ever did. Imagine this. The throne room glows with candlelight, gold everywhere, perfumes thick enough to choke on, and the air so still you can hear your own heartbeat. 100 courtiers kneel in velvet and lace, heads bowed, eyes fixed on the floor. The king moves just once, an almost imperceptible shift, and you feel it ripple through the room like a gust of fear. You probably wouldn't survive this place 5 minutes. Your phone would buzz, you'd flinch, and that would be enough to get you exiled to somewhere cold and muddy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The world you enter doesn't smell of power. It reeks of fear disguised as perfume. You walk carefully, steps muffled by thick carpets meant to absorb sound and scandal alike. The court isn't a place of laughter. It's a stage set for hierarchy, where a misplaced look can ruin you. And above it all sits the monarch, the embodiment of divine order. You've heard the stories, how French courtiers weren't allowed to turn their backs on the king, how even a glance that lingered too long was interpreted as arrogance, even threat. You bow not just because you must, but because standing tall in such a room feels like defiance. One mainstream historical fact: by the 17th century, court etiquette in Europe had become a codified performance. At Versailles, the levee, the royal rising, dictated who could stand where, who could hand the king his shirt, even who could make eye contact. Every second of access meant status, but never equality. To look directly at the king was to blur the boundary between subject and sovereign, and that was forbidden. You glance up once, maybe by accident. The royal eyes, unblinking, distant, pass over you as though you're invisible. And that's the point. In this shimmering world of silk and suspicion, the king isn't meant to be human. His face becomes a kind of sun you orbit but never approach. To meet his gaze would be to prove you've forgotten your orbit, and that's how stars fall. There's a strange, almost comedic side to all this. Courtiers practiced sideways admiration, a method of looking respectfully without actually meeting the king's eyes. Some even trained their necks to angle just so, allowing a flattering view of the monarch's profile while keeping their own humility intact. Imagine an entire room of people craning slightly to the left, as if trapped in some royal yoga class. But behind the absurdity lies something darker. The avoidance of eye contact wasn't just about reverence. It was survival. Kings like Henry VIII or Louis XIV didn't just demand loyalty, they demanded performance. Looking directly at them could be read as challenge, as if you were measuring your soul against theirs. And that was dangerous. Historians still argue whether this obsession with avoiding the royal gaze was born from divine right ideology or simple human insecurity. Was it religion that forbade your eyes to rise, or ego? Maybe both. The king, after all, was supposedly chosen by God. His face reflected heaven. To meet his eyes uninvited was like interrupting a prayer. And yet, you can't help but feel the tension, this quiet absurdity of grown men trembling before another man's glance. You notice tiny gestures everywhere. Fans flicking, sleeves adjusted, jeweled snuff boxes opened for distraction. Everyone's pretending to be at ease, but every heartbeat hums with awareness. You realize the court is not just a palace, it's a pressure chamber. Somewhere in the back, a young page sneezes. The sound slices through the silence, and 100 eyes dart toward him in silent horror. He bows, stammering, nearly in tears. The king doesn't react, but that's almost worse. A single raised eyebrow could determine whether the boy's future ascends or evaporates. You hold your breath too, and then the music resumes, the soft pluck of lutes, the rustle of silk, and the performance continues. You can feel how centuries of ritual have made this place both magnificent and suffocating. It's a human zoo, but the animals have learned to dress well. As you stand among them, pretending to admire a tapestry or a fountain, you wonder what kind of loneliness lives inside the man everyone fears to look at. Power isolates. When no one dares meet your eyes, you stop seeing the world at all. You only see reflections of yourself. Maybe that's why kings went mad, surrounded by mirrors and cowards, unsure who loved them and who waited for them to fall. The strangest part? You start to adjust. After an hour, lowering your gaze feels natural, even comforting. You begin to understand how obedience becomes instinct, and just as you start to forget what normal looks like, you hear the trumpet call. The king is approaching again. Everyone freezes. You bow, breathe, and remind yourself, eyes down, always down. You start to notice that the real architecture of a palace isn't made of marble or gold, it's made of distance. Every hallway, every door, every protocol exists to remind you that the king is not like you. You're not just kept away by guards or gates, you're kept away by rituals. When you wake in the royal residence, your day already belongs to someone else. You're summoned, dismissed, positioned, and posed according to the invisible geometry of power. Even how close you stand determines your worth. The closer you are to the king's body, the higher your social orbit. And yet, if you dare to get too close, too often, you burn. There's a faint perfume of paranoia in the air. No one here dares to breathe too loudly, because even that could be mistaken for pride. Every look, every movement is a transaction. You begin to realize that avoiding the king's gaze isn't just etiquette, it's currency. If you know when to lower your eyes, when to step back, you survive another day. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. In many European courts, this system of deliberate distance was designed. The idea came from the concept of divine monarchy, the ruler as a semi-sacred figure, too radiant for mortal eyes. The most powerful kings of the 15th to 18th centuries adopted rituals borrowed from the church, processions, blessings, and rigid hierarchies of approach. The king's body became a symbol of the state itself. To look directly at it without permission was not just rude, it was treason against order. Historians still argue whether kings believed this myth or just found it convenient. Some scholars think monarchs used divine distance to control ambitious nobles. Others believe the kings themselves were trapped by the illusion, forced to play gods until they forgot they were human. You can't decide which version is sadder, the ruler who believes he's celestial, or the one who knows he isn't, but must act as if. You walk the corridors and see it everywhere. Portraits of kings towering over their subjects, eyes painted to follow you across the room. It's as if even the art conspires to remind you that you're being watched. You try to meet those painted gazes, and a shiver runs through you. Power, it seems, doesn't fade even when the person is long gone. There's one quirky tidbit the guides never tell you. Some courtiers practiced what was called soft vision, a way of seeing without focusing. You'd fix your eyes near the king, but slightly to the side, creating the illusion of attention while avoiding direct gaze. It's the same technique art students use when sketching, a way to perceive shape without piercing detail. You perfect it quickly. After all, survival depends on convincing others that you're reverent, not rebellious. But even with all this choreography, the danger is real. You remember hearing of Philip IV of Spain, who cultivated a kind of royal invisibility. He moved through rooms so quietly, courtiers sometimes didn't realize he'd entered until they were already kneeling. The fear of surprise kept everyone obedient. No one dared lift their head without command. To exist near him was to perform constant self-erasure. You begin to feel how this kind of world shapes people. You start speaking in whispers, thinking in whispers. You make yourself smaller. You laugh only when it's safe. You start to understand that etiquette isn't just about manners, it's a kind of social hypnosis. Once you've bowed enough times, you forget what it feels like to stand tall. Sometimes, in the dark corridors after midnight, you catch the reflections of other courtiers in polished mirrors. You see the same haunted eyes, the same careful smiles. You all share the same unspoken question. What would happen if you just looked? Would the world collapse, or would nothing happen at all? You imagine testing it, meeting the king's gaze for half a heartbeat. Maybe he'd smirk. Maybe he'd have you dragged away. Maybe he'd finally feel seen for the first time in his life. It's a strange thought that the ultimate act of respect might be to remind a ruler that he's human, but you keep that thought locked behind your teeth. Still, every once in a while, a whisper of rebellion escapes. A jester might glance up mid-performance and get away with it because laughter protects him. A child might look up innocently and make the king chuckle instead of rage. These small accidents are the cracks where sunlight leaks into the system. And yet, most of the time, distance wins. The higher the throne rises, the lower everyone else must bow. The rituals become more absurd, audiences that last seconds, gestures rehearsed like choreography. The monarch is less a person than a living emblem, and you're just a reflection in his polished shoes. You start to notice something eerie. The king never looks anyone in the eye either. His gaze always floats just above heads, somewhere toward the horizon. Perhaps he's not avoiding you. Perhaps he's afraid too. Afraid that if he truly saw you, the illusion would shatter and both of you would tumble back into the same ordinary human world. And once you've noticed that, you can't stop thinking about it. The palace suddenly feels less like a temple and more like a very beautiful cage, one built for both ruler and ruled. You walk on, past marble halls and whispering courtiers, and you realize the real power isn't in the gaze that dominates, but in the one withheld. You arrive at Versailles, and instantly it feels like stepping into sunlight that never ends. Gold reflects on gold, mirrors stretch into infinity, and every polished surface seems designed to remind you that there's one center to this universe, and it's not you. You've entered the kingdom of Louis XIV, the Sun King, the man who didn't just rule France, but choreographed it. Versailles isn't just a palace, it's a stage, and you, poor soul, have just been cast in a performance where every step, every breath, every blink must follow the script of etiquette. Here, life revolves around ritualized proximity. You eat, sleep, gossip, and even yawn according to unwritten choreography, because at any given moment the king might appear, and you must be ready to worship with your body. The first thing you learn? Never look him directly in the eye unless he looks first. His gaze is like the sun, meant to be basked in, not returned. That's not poetic exaggeration, it's literal policy. At Versailles, courtiers practiced la révérence du regard, the reverence of the gaze. You fix your eyes on the ground, or if you must, on the royal shoes. You might glimpse the hem of his embroidered coat, maybe his glittering cane, but never his eyes. Looking up would suggest equality, and equality was not fashionable at court. A mainstream historical fact, Louis XIV intentionally built Versailles to control the nobility. He forced them to live under his watchful eye, turning aristocrats into decorative servants. The daily ritual of the lever du roi, the royal rising, was both absurd and brilliant. Nobles would compete for the privilege of handing the king his shirt or holding his mirror while he shaved. They'd wake at dawn just to be near him for 60 seconds. Imagine setting your alarm just to hand someone their socks. Historians still argue whether Louis truly believed in his divine image or simply weaponized it. Some say he saw himself as God's chosen reflection on earth. Others think he just understood power psychology better than any therapist today. By keeping courtiers mesmerized by his clothes, his walk, his unreachable face, he made them forget that he needed them as much as they needed him. The entire kingdom was a masterclass in manipulation by aesthetics. One quirky detail, courtiers sometimes carried small hand mirrors, not to admire themselves, but to catch indirect glimpses of the king without seeming impertinent. Picture a ballroom glittering with 100 mirrors bouncing fragments of the royal reflection. You'd think you were surrounded by Louis XIVs, each one slightly distorted, a hall of divine clones. The king didn't mind. The more copies of his image, the stronger his myth. You watch the daily ballet unfold. The king strolls, deliberately slow, every gesture designed. His courtiers follow 2 steps behind, angled slightly to the side so they can adore without intrusion. You find yourself holding your breath, terrified of blinking at the wrong time. Then, when he speaks, the room falls into total stillness. Even the chandeliers seem to stop flickering. Louis smiles faintly, his version of a royal sunrise, and for a split second you feel warmth. You're hypnotized. And that's how it works. Power doesn't just command, it seduces. The king knows that you'll gladly bow if he makes submission feel like an honor. Later that evening, you find yourself in the Hall of Mirrors, the most famous room in Europe. Candles burn in every sconce, their light multiplying endlessly in glass. You catch your reflection, tiny, distorted, swallowed by the blaze. Behind you, the king passes through, and the crowd ripples like wind over wheat. No one turns. Everyone pretends they didn't notice. That's the rule. You only react when the king chooses you. And yet, for a brief moment, you wonder, does he ever get tired of being the sun? Of knowing that no one dares look at him, not because they love him, but because they're terrified? You imagine his loneliness as something vast, a golden isolation dressed in brocade. Maybe he glances into those same mirrors at night and sees nothing but the echo of his own performance. You hear whispers that he sometimes wandered the gardens alone after midnight, disguised in a cloak, speaking to no one. Historians still debate whether these stories are true or just romantic gossip, but you like to believe them. Maybe the man behind the monarch sometimes needed to see another pair of eyes, unafraid, untrained, human. The night air outside smells of fountains and damp stone. You walk past hedges sculpted like obedience itself and realize that every inch of this place is control disguised as beauty. Even the flowers bloom on schedule. The courtiers murmur, flatter, and bow until their backs ache, but no one ever laughs freely. You start to crave the forbidden, the accidental eye contact that could make the whole illusion crack. And then, once it happens, the king turns suddenly during a dance, and for a breathless half-second his eyes meet yours. They're not blazing suns, they're just eyes, tired, human, oddly searching. You drop your gaze immediately, heart hammering, but the damage is done. You've seen him, really seen him, and something in you changes. The rest of the night passes in a haze of music and powdered wigs, but you can't forget that glance. It felt like trespassing and revelation all at once. You understand now that the reason no one looks the king in the eye isn't just about respect. It's about protection. Not for him, but for you. Once you've seen that power is an act, you can never unsee it. And so, the dance continues. The courtiers circle their golden sun, the mirrors shimmer, the candles die one by one, and you, now wiser, a little sadder, keep your eyes low, your smile fixed, and your thoughts carefully hidden behind powdered calm. Because at Versailles, survival isn't about silence. It's about pretending you never saw the truth glowing behind the crown. By now, you've learned how to survive a French palace, but England's courts demand a whole new kind of performance. Across the Channel, things are less polished and far more unpredictable. Tudor and Stuart monarchs prefer their thrones surrounded by flirtation, gossip, and the faint scent of blood under perfume. If Versailles is a stage play, the English court is a poker game played with daggers hidden up lace sleeves. You find yourself in the presence of Henry VIII first. He of the famous temper, the restless eyes, the neck that seems to strain against both rough and reason. Here, etiquette matters as much as in France, but the tone is different. The king doesn't want statues around him. He wants entertainment. Still, that doesn't mean you can meet his gaze freely. Look too long and he'll assume you're scheming. Look away too soon and he'll assume you're lying. You can't win. You simply manage. A mainstream historical fact. At Henry's court, looking the king directly in the eye could indeed be dangerous. Courtiers like Thomas More or Anne Boleyn learned that even a flicker of disagreement in their expression could seal their fate. The king's moods dictated everything, from religious law to who lost their head that week. So, you learn to keep your face as smooth as marble, eyes politely deferential but never frozen. You master the art of the polite half-look. Just enough to seem attentive, not enough to risk intimacy. Historians still argue whether Henry's obsession with loyalty made him paranoid or whether paranoia made him obsessed with loyalty. Either way, every eye in court reflected his insecurity. It wasn't reverence anymore, it was survival theater. By Elizabeth's reign, the game changes shape, but not substance. You're now surrounded by courtiers draped in jewel-toned silks, practicing clever wordplay instead of swordplay. The queen, sharp as frost, sits under a canopy embroidered with suns, eyes darting like falcons. She wants you to look at her, but on her terms. You must appear dazzled, not direct. You must see her power without appearing to measure it. It's a visual performance of worship. There's a quirky tidbit about Elizabeth's court. Courtiers actually rehearsed how to receive her gaze. Some would spend hours in front of mirrors, perfecting expressions of awe. One chronicler joked that flattery was the national sport. But really, it was survival disguised as poetry. If you looked upon her too boldly, you risked being labeled vain or lustful. Too timid, and you seemed dull. The sweet spot was somewhere between admiration and holy fear. You find yourself thinking how exhausting it must be to live like this. To wake every day knowing your eyeballs could end your career, and yet the thrill is real. The glances traded in those candlelit rooms mean everything. Lovers flirt through the flicker of eyes. Enemies duel without drawing blades. You begin to understand that in these courts, language is less spoken and more seen. Then comes the Stuart era, and everything softens just a little. Charles Fouas, shy and art-loving, prefers portraits to people. You might never meet his gaze at all. His power lives in paint. When you do see him, you notice that he looks through people rather than at them. Maybe he learned from his predecessors that the fewer connections you make, the fewer betrayals you'll feel. Or maybe he simply didn't know how to meet anyone's eyes without revealing his fear. Historians still debate Charles's downfall. Whether it was his absolutism or his inability to connect with his subjects that led to his head being displayed to the crowd. Either way, the moment the executioner raised that head, something profound changed in Europe. For the first time, a king's eyes looked directly into the crowds, and then looked no more. The divine gaze had been shattered by human hands. After that, no monarch could pretend to be invincible again. But the etiquette lingered. Even centuries later, Victorian courtiers still practiced controlled glances, careful bows, subtle distance. The habit of not looking up had sunk too deep into the body to be unlearned overnight. You realize now that courtly fear isn't just historical, it's inherited posture. One evening, you find yourself wandering through a candlelit English gallery lined with portraits of long-dead nobles. All those painted faces look slightly away, eyes tilted toward eternity. It hits you. Even in art, no one dares look out at you. The silence feels thick, almost embarrassed. You half expect one of them to whisper, "Don't stare, he might see you." You lean closer to a portrait of Elizabeth, her pale face powdered into near divinity. Her painted eyes seem alive, assessing you. You hold her gaze, just for a moment, and feel the centuries shiver. Maybe this is what all those courtiers feared. Not punishment, but recognition. To be truly seen by power is to risk being changed by it. Somewhere behind you, a floorboard creaks. You turn, expecting to see another guest, but it's only your reflection in the dark glass of a window. Watching yourself, eyes wide, head bowed just slightly. as if your body still remembers who it was trained to serve. The candle flickers. You smile softly. Maybe we never stopped living in those courts after all. You step away from the portraits, from the tapestries, from the echo of powdered shoes clicking through centuries. The palace dissolves behind you, but the feeling lingers. That low hum of obedience, of eyes lowered and neck bent. And as you walk into the modern world, something strange happens. You realize you're still doing it. You still avoid certain gazes. You still look down when power walks into the room. The architecture of deference didn't die with the kings, it just changed costume. Now, power wears suits instead of crowns, logos instead of crests. The thrones are boardroom chairs. The courtiers are employees refreshing inboxes for approval. When the CEO passes by, you instinctively avert your eyes, not because you'll be beheaded, but because something ancient in you remembers that looking directly at power feels dangerous. You watch people in elevators, how they stare at the glowing numbers, at their phones, anywhere but each other. A whole society of lowered eyes. It's court etiquette reborn in fluorescent light. A mainstream historical fact. After the fall of monarchy as a divine system, the habits of deference simply migrated. Psychologists have studied this, how hierarchies condition physical behavior. People lower their heads or break eye contact automatically when faced with authority figures. It's the same body language that once governed Versailles and Whitehall, now written into office culture and social norms. Power, it seems, no longer needs crowns. It just needs your silence. Historians still argue whether we ever truly left the royal mindset behind. Did democracy really dethrone the divine image, or did it just distribute it among celebrities and politicians? You scroll past famous faces, influencers, billionaires, and feel the same magnetic pull of gaze and distance. You may never meet them, but you still perform the same reverence. The screen has become the new throne. There's even a quirky modern echo of those old mirror tricks. People hold up their phones like courtiers once held mirrors, capturing the reflection of someone famous without direct approach. You'll see it at concerts, rallies, red carpets. Thousands of tiny glass rectangles lifted toward a modern monarch. No one looks at the person, they look at the image. And that's how the ritual survives, endlessly replicated, endlessly safe. You start to laugh quietly at the absurdity of it. Maybe we never stopped being courtiers, we just got better lighting. We still practice the reverence of the gaze every day, scrolling, liking, following. We still bow digitally, even as we pretend to be free. And then you remember all those kings, the Sun King with his endless mirrors, Henry with his haunted eyes, Elizabeth shining beneath a powdered halo, and realize that each of them was just as trapped as their servants. When no one dares meet your eyes, you lose the ability to see anything real. The monarch's loneliness wasn't just political, it was spiritual. You pause, imagining one of those ancient courts at dawn. The air is pale blue, the corridors empty. A servant dusts the gilded frame of a portrait, and for a heartbeat, the king's painted gaze seems to meet his. Nothing happens. No lightning strike, no divine wrath. Just two sets of eyes, quietly existing in the same room. That, you think, is what was forbidden all along. Not defiance, but equality. The terrifying idea that beneath all the crowns and rituals and wigs, you and the king were always the same animal. The thought softens something in you. You feel a strange compassion for both sides of the bow. Power isn't just oppression, it's also isolation. The courtiers needed approval, the kings needed worship. Everyone was trapped by the same choreography of fear. And maybe, even now, we still are. You glance at your reflection in a darkened window. For the first time, you hold your own gaze instead of looking away. It feels strange, intimate. You think of every generation before you, eyes lowered out of habit, and you whisper softly, "It's okay now." The silence that follows is peaceful. The ancient etiquette fades like dust in sunlight. Now the wind down begins, slowly, like curtains closing on a centuries-long play. So you sit there for a while, breathing slowly, feeling the centuries settle around you like soft velvet. The palaces are gone now, the torches long cold, but the echoes of those whispered rules still hum faintly beneath modern noise. You could almost hear the rustle of silk, the gentle clearing of throats, the tap of shoes waiting for permission to move. But the air feels different tonight, looser somehow, freer. You picture the faces of those long-vanished courtiers finally lifting their eyes. You picture the kings, the queens, the attendants, all blinking as if waking from a very long dream. No more mirrors, no more bowing, just the simple relief of being looked at and understood. You take one more slow breath and imagine stepping out of the hall, barefoot, into quiet dawn air. The sky glows pale gold, but it's not blinding anymore. The sun is gentle now, and the world no longer needs thrones to hold it up. If you listen closely, you might still hear the faint laughter of the jesters, the swish of embroidered sleeves, the sigh of a crown being set down for the last time. But it's all drifting away now, fading like candle smoke, soft and harmless. Your shoulders loosen, your eyes grow heavy. You've survived the court, you've seen the gaze that once ruled empires, and now it no longer rules you. So let the night take you gently. The lights dim, the fan hums, and the last echoes of golden halls fade into stillness. Somewhere far away, a king closes his eyes, and this time, no one looks away. Sweet dreams.